Google dumps podcasts. The latest from Podnews.net with critically acclaimed, highly addictive CBC podcasts. After our exclusive last month about Google removing podcasts from Google Search, Google has confirmed the move in an announcement in Google Podcasts Manager. Additionally, the tool will no longer give any data under how people find your show from February the 13th, meaning an end to the research tool. Podcasts continue to appear in Google search results, but not linked to Google's own player. We've reached out to Google for comment. 97% of Americans and 91% of Canadians say they've taken action after listening to a podcast ad. According to new research from Acast, which has just been released, the study also suggests that a majority of listeners follow a podcaster on social media. You'll spot a new name at the top of future Triton Digital and Edison Podcast Metrics reports, SiriusXM Podcast Network. Previously, the company was listed as Stitcher Media or SXM Media, but we're told they saw an opportunity to unify their naming conventions. Podtrac has released the company's stats for January. iHeart Podcasts is still number one in the publisher list, which doesn't measure its competitors SiriusXM or Spotify. Wondery remains number one sales network. The Daily remains number one podcasts, with NPR's Up First climbing to number 3. All of those are participating publishers only. The Hollywood Reporter is claiming that the number of business deals in podcasting is growing fewer. Podcast content creators at Crooked Media have unionized with the Writers Guild of America East. How do you market your podcast? The Podcast Marketing Academy wants to hear your experience to be able to pull trends and data into a free report. You can take the survey in a link you'll find in our show notes and our newsletter today. Sonos has added integration with TuneIn Radio and podcasts with a link to add your podcast there and everywhere else. And the Unnoticed Entrepreneur podcast has signed a 6-month sponsorship agreement with Prowly, a public relations platform. And in podcast news, listener show Just the Gist returns for 2023, with Rosie Waterland returning to the mic full-time, rejoining co-host Jacob Stanley. The show, which looks at scandals, conspiracies, politics and people, also moves to becoming twice weekly. Once Upon a Meadow is new today, a show for 4 to 9-year-olds featuring fictional tales about a community of animals and plants who work together to flourish despite their differences. Each story contains original music. And Overheard at National Geographic launches a new season today called The Soul of Music, a month-long 4-part series of episodes focused on music and exploration, featuring influential black musicians and accomplished National Geographic explorers. This podcast is sponsored by CBC Podcasts. The Africas versus America chronicles Black Liberation Organization MOVE and how Philadelphia came to drop a bomb on its own citizens. Host Matthew Armour investigates what led up to the 1985 tragedy and its reverberations decades later in the story of when the US went to war on an American family. Today only, the trailer comes next. And that's the latest from our newsletter. To read all the stories and subscribe, we're at podnews.net.
In the summer of 2020, I watched the biggest protest movement in American history inspire the belief that change might finally arrive. The Black Lives Matter movement felt like a reckoning. But despite that energy and all of the conversation it inspired, there remained little mention of one of the most disproportionate uses of police violence in American history.
We will never get a chance to embrace our children and hug them and kiss them because they're not here, because this government took them away from us.
On Mother's Day 1985, the city of Philadelphia did something unthinkable to its own citizens on its own soil.
I got a call around 3 o'clock in the morning. Lynn, get over here, it's going down. Click.
For more than a decade, the city had been engaged in a standoff with a radical organization called MOVE, and the Philadelphia Police Department were now here to resolve the MOVE question for good.
The police commissioner gets on his bullhorn and says, "Attention, MOVE. This is America. You have to abide by the laws and rules of America.
There were so many bullets in that morning shootout that they were ricocheting off the sidewalk like hail.
And then,
the helicopter takes off, it flies around, it circles, and then you hear an explosion, and the neighborhood shook so violently. I mean, it seemed like the ground moved.
the city of Philadelphia dropped a bomb on MOVE's headquarters, a house in the heart of a residential community, a black community, killing 11 people, 5 of them children, and burning 61 homes to the ground.
My daughters were taken away by this fucking corrupt government. They dropped a bomb.
Their aim was to kill us, plain and simple.
Why is it that nearly 40 years on, so many have never heard of the MOVE bombing? And what does this cultural amnesia say about us? From CBC Podcasts and Confluential Films, the story of an American family's fight against the system. A family targeted by the U.S. government's war on black liberation. And what this forgotten American tragedy tells us about racism, power, and the price of change today.
Black people will never get justice in America. I ain't talking about an individual person here and there. I'm talking about people, black people. We'll never get justice. It wasn't made for us.
I'm Matthew Amha, and this is the Africas versus America, a 7-part podcast series on CBC Listen and wherever you get your podcasts.